I like self-promotion.
So, thank you, Luan.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm Luan Hanratty. I'm a Tyne lad, and thanks a lot. Cheers. And I'm not academic strictly. I'm more of a media person, a writer, a teacher, and I've lived abroad for quite a long time. And when I came back to this country, I got in touch with my friend Gary, who's here, and we're kind of partners in crime and investigating local history things and writing about them and publicising them, kind of history in your backyard kind of thing. And Blake Chester's a bit of a mystery. Now, it's a supposed Roman fort in North Shields, Blake Chester's, and I'll talk all about this, but here we've actually got it on a map here, and it's the only map pretty much with Blake Chester's written on it, and this map comes from Collingwood Bruce's Handbook to the Roman War. And it's actually, if you, as every decade, that Collingwood Bruce's Handbook to the Roman Wall, I think it was written in the 1850s. Every decade it gets updated, and so it's a relevant book. But I think in the 1930s this got erased. Blake Chester's got taken out, and I kind of understand why, because they want to keep the handbook, the successive editors of it, they want to keep the handbook relevant as a thing. But as North Shields got built up and everything, any trace of Blake Chester's disappeared under the urbanisation of North Shields, and so I find that a bit sad, really, that we've lost. It's been omitted and erased from history a little bit. But this is the one map we have. It's a fold-out map in the back of the handbook. So early editions have that. So yeah, and that's my website. Now, this guy John Hodgson. I'm sure many of you know who's John Hodgson. You know?
Saviour of the Wall.
Right, exactly. He's the guy who's attributed. He's widely recognised as the first person to attribute the building of the wall to Emperor Hadrian, and he did that through what's known as the longest footnote in history. Yeah. So he wrote a history of Northumberland, and then in later editions of that, it was actually half the book was a footnote to say, actually, I've got all this proof that Hadrian built the wall. So he's a really important guy, Hodgson, a brilliant historian. And he felt Blake Chester's was important enough to include in the very first edition of Archaeologia Aeliana, the Bible, which is still going today. And so it was seen important enough to include in the very first edition of that. And like I say, because at that time North Shields hadn't really been built up, and so he was able to see remains of it on the ground, and he wrote about that, as did Collingwood Bruce. So Collingwood Bruce wrote quite a lot about Blake Chester's and put it in the handbook. But again, his tracts in the handbook have been erased in modern editions of the handbook, which is a bit of a shame. So Collingwood Bruce said, as you go out from Segadunum, east of Wallsend, you can see along the railway line, pretty much along that route, you can see sort of various oblongs and remains of a station at Blake Chester's. So, I mean, Collingwood Bruce was a brilliant guy, brilliant antiquary, and he had lots of great theories about what existed around the place. Another one was that he felt that there was Jarrow Town Hall Field was a Roman fort, which I believe as well. It seems likely. Anyway, so this is the big mystery, because why didn't the wall go all the way to the sea? It certainly does on the west coast of the country. But it stops at Wallsend, and so you've got that 3-mile gap between Wallsend and the coast where there's no wall. And I think it's pretty much a sort of consensus today in history, in local history and Roman history, that there must have been some kind of treaty in place with the Fontidini people. The Romans must have viewed them as civilized. Civilitas was a very important thing for the Romans, and so they must have felt that these weren't the kind of the unsettled types. You see, what we have to understand is that the wall was built. Many people think that the wall was built as a reaction. Emperor Hadrian came across, and he had this wall built, the Roman wall, as a reaction to almost to keep the Brigantes in, as well as it was to keep the northern tribes out of Roman territory. So the Brigantes were the largest tribe in the country. You know, their territory included pretty much all of Yorkshire, and and the historical county of Yorkshire is the biggest county in England. And the Brigantes even back then had the biggest territory. And the Brigantes were at first were friendly to Rome. They were allied with Rome. But there was a point in about 110 AD that the Brigantes fell out with Rome, and there was all sorts of political intrigues at the time, and there was a rebellion, and that's often called the Hadrianic Rebellion, 110 AD. And so the wall, many people think the wall was built as a reaction to that in 122, 12 years later, not just to keep the wild tribes of the Novantae and the Selgovae in the wild kind of hills of the borders, but also to stop them building alliances with the Brigantes. So the Votadini are separate from that. The Votadini occupied the territory which is the eastern fertile, flatter coastal plain of Northumbria, the Tyne 4th province, you could call it. All that land, it's more fertile, it's more settled, and the Votadini people, it seems they supplied a lot of grain and gave a lot of grain to the Romans, and who knows, they may have even invited the Romans to come and build the wall to protect them and keep them safe. And maybe they had a treaty, and they sent their sons to Rome to married their daughters to Roman officers and things like that. So it seems a very plausible, realistic. Because why would they just leave this space, why would they leave the East Coast unguarded? So lots of people have written about that, and it's quite a well-established consensus, like I say. Now, there was a space, even though there's a sort of blind spot and an empty space between Wallsend and the coast. That's not to say it wasn't unfortified and unguarded. So, Blake Chester's, it's in the right place. It kind of, the location that we've pinpointed for Blake Chester's, it seems to be in the right interval of mile castles and forts and all that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So this is the oldest reference that we have to Blake Chester's, and this is called the Tynemouth Chartelary. And the Tynemouth Chartelary was written in 1320, this one. And the Chartelary was a list basically of all the prior of Tynemouth was a very powerful man in the region in medieval times. And the Chartelary is a list of all his privileges and all his legal rights and all his liberties and property. And in this Chartelary of 1320, a load of land is delineated, a load of land that belongs to a guy called Henry Fawkes of West Backworth is delineated to allow the monks right of way through his land so they could quarry slate to roof the priory. And so there must have been quite a lot of movement and work going on in Henry Fawkes' land. So it's just lined up. This land belongs to Henry Fawkes. And the thing about this is, we got a copy of this text mentioning Blake Chester's. I can't actually find it in all this text. It's kind of impenetrable, but it's somewhere in there, by a guy called Christopher Hunnick, who's the chief of the archives, in charge of the archives at Northumberland Archives, the Duke's massive archives. And he was very helpful to us, Christopher Hunnick. And the key thing that he gave us along with this was a translation. And it's a very accurate translation written in the 1940s. And that was so helpful because this gave us massive clarity. Because the translation that circulated in academia and all that prior to this modern translation was mainly from Craster, the historian H.H.E. Craster, who wrote this massive tome, The History of Northumberland, in 1907, I think it was, The History of Northumberland. Craster was a brilliant historian, and he got free rein of the Duke's archives to write this massive History of Northumberland. And in this he writes about Blake Chester's. He's quite sceptical of it, actually, and he sort of dismisses Collingwood Bruce a lot. And basically he's got this translation of the Chartelary and Henry Fawkes' land in the Chartelary, and it's actually incorrect. There's errors in it, and I was able to compare it to this proper translation and find out that Craster's actually he's misinterpreted a bit. And so Craster's basically saying, okay, this is Henry Fawkes' land. I'll show you the map actually. Here's the map. This trapezoid here is Henry Fawkes' land. And Craster didn't quite get that. He didn't understand that. Now, Craster was, like I say, a brilliant historian and very just a brilliant scholar. But he wasn't hyperlocalized to the North Tyneside area, actually. And when you are hyperlocalized to this area, you do get a much clearer picture of what the chortlery says. And it's obvious that he didn't understand where Blake Chesters was. He placed Blake Chesters somewhere up here, about 2 miles from where we think it is. And that's why previous digs by Durham University, they were looking in the wrong place. They were looking around Preston Grange. And it seems that he conflated Holystone up in Shire Moor as well with Blake Chesters. And Cresta was, like I say, not exactly hyper-localised. I mean, there's a great contrast in the thesis that I've put between Collingwood Bruce and Cresta. And Collingwood Bruce was very much a hands-on antiquarian. He was one of Newcastle's great sons, really. I mean, there's a mausoleum to him in the cathedral. We went to a thing last week about about Collingwood Bruce and what a great scholar he was. He went out and he was self-taught pretty much. He was a real antiquary, and he sort of went out and drew the things that he found and theorised on them and published them. And he was a very hands-on guy. But Cresta, it seems, was more confined to the dusty library of the archives, and he was not exactly from the area. So anyway, I was able to, in these blue points are the points that are pinpointed in the chortlery, and St Leonard's Hospital is also mentioned in the same page, basically. So I've added that there. And now you get this nice, neat shape, which actually fits the geography of the land very well. And this line here fits well, actually, you've got, if you, this red line is the line, if you go due east out of Segadunum and go right to Tyne Castle, let's say, which is the obvious point that the Romans would have had a signal station here, a fortified here, then it kind of follows this route here, which is a very natural route, and it's raised, it's on a ridge. So this is like a lot of old historians call this the fosse. Okay, and fosse, it means like a vallum or a ditch. So basically, you get this very nice, here you get this kind of nice neat from Merton Stairs to Billy Mill to Blake Chesters. That's a nice line, that. In itself, it's just a coincidence perhaps, but when you match it to this natural line of where the Roman road would have been, then now you're thinking, well, this now is starting to seem a lot more plausible, a lot more realistic now. So that's where we believe that Blake Chesters is, and it's the southernmost point. And I've written in more detail about this anyway. So the interesting thing, I think, is like I said before, it fits a natural interval. It seems to occupy a natural space where as forts were. So as you go along the wall, the forts were usually at good intervals. Blake Chesters really fits that, and Adrian's Mound seems to be like a negative mile castle. So it's a minus mile castle that's almost exactly halfway between the priory. I feel the Romans must have had something on the priory, but there's not been great evidence for that. So a lot of the priory remains unexcavated as well. So there's lots to think about. I mean, Arbere's down here, and Arbere is one of the biggest forts in the country, right? So if you think of it, if you take the whole thing as the whole picture, it starts to plug in to the picture of Roman occupation east of the wall starts to become a little bit clearer. This is speculated. That's speculated that they had something on Clifford's Fort site. That's really the seed of North Shields, Clifford's Fort, and that's where the very first settlements at North Shields were in 1225, 800 years ago, exactly almost. So I feel there must have been something here. And strangely enough, if you line up Blake Chesters and you line up this what might have been where the low light is, exactly where the Clifford's Fort, then you find this. You've got this navigation transit, which the low light is a navigation transit with the high light up here. So I don't know. That's just a fancy theory, and it's quite neat that it looks clever, but it's interesting to think about. But I think Adrian's Mound. I'll talk about Adrian's Mound. That was Northumberland Park, which Tynemouth Road, where the metro line goes over Northumberland Park, over Tanner's Bank, and you've got. I mean, that's a great valley, that, and a bit like the Ousburn Valley, and apparently Victorian engineers who were working, Victorian landscapers who were working for the Duke of Northumberland when he was forming Northumberland Park. As they were like digging out the park and landscaping it, they found evidence of what they felt was a Roman camp. So they named it Adrian's Mound. But I mean, it's in the right spot. It really is in the right spot, and it's right on the correct line, which is now Linskill Terrace. This road. So North Street's another one. Cressida didn't get that quite right. This is the Broadway North Street, and that's the North Street's the Broadway's a very ancient route into Tynemouth, as is Tynemouth Road, you know, as is King Edward's Road. So you've got these kind of ancient roads, all roads lead into Tynemouth kind of thing, and Cressida didn't quite have that right, didn't know where that was. And the Monkstone, that represents the boundary, the northern boundary of the Prior's lands. So it makes sense now. This today is Alexander Scott Park in the middle of North Shields. And the one clear thing that the 1320 Travelry says is that Blakechester's is in a field in East Churton. That's the number one thing, there's no disputing. East Churton in the old days would have been around here, because as North Shields expanded only really when the railway arrived. Now the railway arrived in 1839, if I'm right, and this railway is today the Metro line, and like I say, it occupies a ridge. It's slightly raised up, the fosse they call it. Some antiquaries have called it the fosse of the past. And Collingwood Bruce talks about this railway line and this natural ridge where you could see the outline. So we're guessing it's around this space, and it straddles the railway. Okay, and the guy who claimed it was here, first claimed it was here, was an antiquary in the 19th century called George Rippon. And George Rippon was a sort of a local businessman. He had a huge mansion, a big manor house here, which got bombed in 1941, so it's all gone now. But this was called Waterville. His estate was called Waterville, and there was a reservoir here, and he was a brewer as well, Rippon. And Rippon was an antiquary, so he was a great collector of all these kind of artifacts. And he was adamant that there was Roman thought on his land. In fact, there are stones that he claimed were Roman, which have kind of been debunked, and when they were checked out, these stones, they were sort of 18th century fakes. But nevertheless, this is where we feel it is. It's like I say, today it's Alexander Scott Park, and this northern bit is the bottom end of the playing field of St Cuthbert's Primary School. So the rail, like I say, it sort of straddles the railway. Now, nothing's ever been found here, but I would suggest, people have suggested, oh, we've got to have a dig. You know, the next thing to do is to dig a trench there, and let's really examine this. Well, my suggestion, if there was going to be a dig, probably the best place to do it would be behind the railway wall on the railway embankment, which is like a big V-cut thing. It's probably never been touched since 1839, since the Victorians dug it out. And that big ravine basically has got the layers in it that you would be very good for digging into and finding things. And lots of things would have been thrown up in digging that ravine as well, which again it provides fertile ground, I think, on both sides of this railway track. I think that's where the best place to probably look for anything. So it's in the right spot, it's on the right line. I've talked about this beacon here. It's a nice idea, this beacon, but look, there's other reasons that Blakechester's makes sense being here. It's at the bend in a river. They call this Panache Point, or Comical Corner it's called on the south side. The Romans like to be at an apex of a river, and the major apex of the Tyne is Segaturnum. So the Romans could look down the Bill Reach and the Long Reach, and not much could happen on the river without the Romans knowing about it. And so they had a similar situation here, so they could see right down into the harbour, and they could see right along to Jarrow. And like I say, if there was a fort at Jarrow, then that makes sense. That the Romans didn't like blind spots, so they like to keep in line with Hadrian's Mount is over here and the priory there. You can see Arbor very clearly. This is Arbor, and you can see anywhere you are in North Shields, you can see Clean Water Tower, and apparently that Clean Mill at that very high point, that was supposedly a Roman station, and Penshaw Hill, you can see in the distance. So like I say, the Romans didn't like blind spots, and again this plugs into a sort of landscape of controlling the harbour. There's also lots of waterways around here. It's very rare that the Romans built a camp without a water source. Very rare. Housesteads is one, but I can't think of many others. But there's lots of water around here. There's down Hilton Street, there's a stream still runs on the ground today. There is the Bedford Street here, it was called the Sicket Burn, that went into Doggerletshire, and the Spring Gardens indicates a water source, the estate up the top here. and this estate was a reservoir. It was called Waterville. So, and Waterville Road's just here. So you've got like a lot of water there for the Romans. They like that. There's lots of old walls around this park. Old sandstone walls, really old. And so I've made a note of all of those, and I've plotted them all on a map. So there's 5 or 6 sections of wall. Just seems to fit in to me. What else was I thinking? What else makes it? Yeah, and it's on the right line, and there's so much seems to piece together. Okay, this Pharos idea, I don't know. I've got a guru in Roman history. He's called Peter Christopherian Angus. Peter Angus is the guy I go to for any questions about Rome. He's like an encyclopedia of Roman history in Northumberland, especially. And he came up with this theory, and I think it does seem right. It's the right line. To keep ships safe away from the Black Middens and the herd sands is it's very difficult to navigate into the Tyne harbour, and even though the Romans had flat-hulled ships, those are still no match for the Black Middens or the herd sands. It was a very difficult thing as navigating the harbour. The Romans were engineers primarily, and they would have considered that a lot. Right. Not keeping track of time too much, but I'm getting towards the end of it. This is interesting, these signal stations on the Yorkshire coast. That's an artist's impression of one at Scarborough Castle, Scarborough Castle shares similar geography to Tynemouth in a way. I think the Tynemouth Priory headland could well have been a signal station. And here we are, so it's just some pictures of what it really looks like. You see, I go and watch No Shields all the time, and I'm always standing on this terrace here, and I'm always looking at that bluff there, and that bluff is exactly where it is. So the Romans had a lovely perch there looking right across the river, and as you stand in Arbor, again, I live in South Shields now, so I walk around Arbor all the time, and it's just there, that line of trees there, that's it, very close by, and you see you've got a little ridge going up, it's almost got a little ridge there. I don't know, but here it is from the south side as well, so it's in the prime spot, and this is the ferry landing, so maybe the ferry, that place for the ferry to cross is a very ancient crossing, because you avoid a lot of swell from the sea if you cross here. So I don't know. It seems to make sense to me. And like I said, if we're going to have a dig here, I think probably on this railway embankment would be fertile ground, possibly quite fruitful place, because like I say, the layers are already there. Okay, that's all.